Path of the Princess by Thomas McClure. The princess was well rested when she finally awoke. Her bed was big and warm and soft, so she wanted to savor it as best she could. There would be no more nights like that until their journey was over. She reached over and rang the bell for some wine, another little treat before the trip. Mara was rarely allowed to treat herself to such luxuries, and the few times she were often followed by a lecture by her cousin and her accountant about coin and caution and thinking ahead. But once they were home, they'd never have to worry about coin ever again. They were no longer exiles. They were members of the royal court, and she was officially the royal princess Mara Moran. The door swung open, and in walked Annette of Arno, with an amiable look on her face and a jug of wine in her hands. Mara had expected her lady-in-waiting to be waiting on her, not her low-born cousin. She supposed that this meant the company was packed and ready for their trip already. The princess was spread out on the best bed in the tavern, wrapped in the finest sheets she had ever felt. She should have felt guilty. Annette must have been working since dawn to prepare for the journey, but the bed was far too nice to feel any such thing, and it was Annette's duty to serve, and Mara's duty to be served. "I asked for Sommerfell wine," Annette told her as she poured a glass. "A taste of home, princess." "How did you get your hands on this?" Mara asked. She knew the innkeeper had a few bottles behind the bar, but the law was strict about drinking under an age, and the innkeeper was stricter. No wine for those under 20, and Mara had only just turned 14. "Julia thinks it is for Sir Damien, princess. Let us keep it that way." They shared a smile, and Mara almost asked if she'd like to share a drink too, but thought better of it. Annette had to keep her wits about her for the trip. Mara rolled over the bed towards her, wrapping herself up even tighter, though keeping an arm free. She looked up at her cousin. Her true name was Annette Baker, but they called her Annette of Arno instead, as it sounded more befitting for a cousin of royalty. She, like Mara, had long, silver-gold hair, sharp features, and warm skin. When they were children, they looked almost identical, with the only real difference being that Mara had dark green eyes, almost hazel, while Annette's eyes were bright. They were often mistaken for one another, but Mara's mother put a stop to that. "She must remember her place," she had said. "Her mother married a baker, your mother married a prince." As time passed, their looks diverged, most notably in the past few years. While Annette read books, kept accounts, and did simple serving work, Mara had taken to the sword. Their company had to adapt to their wayward life, and since they were a small sellsword company, Mara decided to train to be a knight, to prove her worth. She was glad she didn't have to commit to that anymore. Annette kept her unblemished skin and dainty frame, and being a year older, she had started to look like a woman. Mara, instead, started to grow bulkier than bustier, with scratches and scars from swordplay mishaps. "I hope father still recognizes me," she thought. "I hope I'm still the princess he remembers." Annette cleared her throat. Mara realized she was still staring at her, and that Annette was standing still, looking straight ahead above Mara at nothing, awaiting her command. Mara took a moment to remember what Annette had been teaching her to do. She gave her servant a brief nod, and with that Annette took her leave, no doubt to inform the others that Mara was finally awake. The princess had forgotten all the royal curtsies her old ladies-in-waiting had taught her. She never thought their exile would come to an end, and so remembering it seemed pointless. Even the title of princess was, until recently, legally dubious. Annette, though, had a good memory and seemed to remember it all perfectly, despite only being present during those lessons as a servant, never as a student. Mara reached over and took the glass of wine to help with her sore throat. She swirled it around for a moment and looked deep into it. Sommerfell wine, from the kingdom of Amica, the home she never knew. Her father was Prince Kenneth. He was falsely accused of a high crime when he was young, and so his brother, the king, had no choice but to exile him. Princess Mara was born shortly after her father began his exile, so she had never known Amica, her homeland. She took a whiff of the wine and began to drink. Before the summer is over, she thought, I will know home, and all will be right. Mara thought about calling for more wine as she dressed, but she had to say goodbye to jolly Julia first, who had done well to look after her company for the past few days, and she didn't want to smell of wine. From her table she took out her old tiara, a fine silver circlet. It was once decorated with red rubies and white diamonds, but in times when work was hard to come by, they had to sell them to survive. She hadn't worn it outside in years. It was too dangerous with just 2 knights protecting her. But now they were going home, she felt it apt to wear it again. I am a princess. I must look the part. Wearing her finest clothes that she was fast outgrowing, Mara skipped through the tavern, thanked Julia with a kiss to the cheek, and then danced out into the street. The warm sun made the dirt road look golden and the whitewashed walls of the tavern shine. Her company was there waiting for her by the rickety cart. When Annette saw her, she gave the signal for them to get moving. Mara bounced over to Sir Damien and asked him to lift her up onto the cart. Yes, princess, he said in his grisly voice, as he always did. He was a tall and broad man with thick scars, a missing eye, a grey beard, and heavy armour, but he was always soft with her. His huge hands grabbed her waist and hoisted her up onto the cart. He tapped the wood, and with that Annette got the horses moving. Mara lay back in the cart and let her lady-in-waiting, Bella of Bright Hill, braid her hair. She closed her eyes and felt the cart creak beneath her. She was used to travelling. It always made her feel like she was progressing somewhere, and for the first time in her life, it was true. I'm going home, and I'm never leaving again. For most of her childhood, Mara travelled with her father and his company in exile. Well over 100 people followed them as they traversed the continent, serving as sellswords in search of gold and glory. But then, nearly 4 years ago, there was an attack. Her father and his mercenaries had signed a contract to defend some city in the hinterlands, but the battle was lost, and the city was sacked. Mara's mother didn't make it, but she and a few others were rescued by her sworn sword, Sir Damien of the Dam, an exiled knight. They searched for her father, but to no avail. The country was a mess after that, and so they had to keep moving to survive. As the years passed, her new company came to believe that Kenneth and the rest of his own company had died in the battle. Since then, they had been carrying on her father's work as sellsword knights, selling their services as swordsmen to earn a living. There were 6 of them in her company. Mara sat back up, the braids in her hair only half done, and she looked around at them. Bella was pretty but plain and twice Mara's age. She was the daughter of some noble back in Amica, who sent her off in hope she may court the exiled prince, though she became Mara's lady-in-waiting instead of her father's mistress. She did little in the company save for grooming Mara's hair and sometimes helping her get dressed or don her armour. Almost like a squire, Mara thought. Behind the cart followed Edmund Anders, a skittish, scholarly fellow in his 20s that served as their accountant. To her right walked Sir Damien, his eyes looking out for danger, and to her left was Sir Pierre. His eyes were fixed only on her. He had been a squire until half a year ago, when Sir Damien knighted him, and in turn Pierre took Mara on as his own squire. She enjoyed lessons with him far more than she enjoyed lessons with Annette. Sir Pierre was a year older than her, tall and lean, dark and handsome, good with a blade, good with his fingers, good with everything really. His eyes lingered on her, and a knowing smile crossed his face. Her mind went to last night, and she blushed, her head falling back into Bella's lap as she closed her eyes. She felt a little light-headed and hot under the relentless sun. She regretted wearing her finest clothes. They were still weeks away from reaching Amica. Last in their troop was Annette, who served Mara the most. She scheduled her days, cooked her food, washed her clothes, cleaned her armour, cared for her when she was sick, taught her what she needed to know, negotiated their contracts, and managed her company, all without any complaint. They had a good thing going with their company. They didn't make nearly as much as they did under her father's much larger company, but they made do. But everything changed last week, when in service to a rich merchant, the topic of Amica was brought up, and that was when they found out where her father had been all this time. Prince Kenneth had returned to his homeland, called back and pardoned by his ailing brother, who passed away shortly thereafter, making Mara's father the King of Amica. The merchant told them that King Kenneth lights a candle at church every night to pray for his youngest daughter's safe return, and that this had led the people to dub the missing princess as the White Flame. With their exile lifted, Mara ordered Annette to make plans for them to travel across the continent and bring them home to the kingdom of Amica. "When we're home," Mara said aloud, "I'd like to keep you all with me." "That would be wonderful, Princess," said Bella, as she continued to braid Mara's hair. She felt leather on her cheek. Turning her head to the side, she opened her eyes and saw Pierre leaning on the moving cart, his glove on her face. He had a devilish smile. "I'd like that, Princess." Mara felt her cheeks turn red. Bella lightly battered Pierre's hand off of the princess. He chuckled as he got off the cart and continued walking. Mara looked back up at the blue sky above. She had been dreaming of living in Amica as a proper princess since she was a little girl, and she had been dreaming of Pierre as her own prince since she started to become a woman. His father was an exiled noble. With his service to her, she was sure her father would grant his lands and titles back to him, and then he'd be a noble hero, one of a high enough rank to marry a third-born princess, surely. "Pierre will be my betrothed," Mara thought to herself. "Bella, my royal lady-in-waiting, Edmund, my personal exchequer, and Sir Damien will be my royal sworn sword." "Sir Damien," Mara called out, "when we arrive in Amica, I want you to be awarded the highest of honours. You have protected me my whole life. We'd all be dead without you. You deserve it. Would you like that?" She smiled, already knowing what he would say. "Yes, Princess." Mara sighed and closed her eyes again, hoping to dream of her life as a proper princess, not just a wayward exiled one. Her friends would be by her side forever, and Annette would be there too, serving her as always. Mara smiled to herself, and then she began to cough. The servant was exhausted when she was finally done. Her arms were aching from the digging, and her cheeks were sore from the tears. It was a shallow grave, not befitting a royal princess at all, but it was all she could do. The night was starless, closer to dawn than dusk. Annette set a white candle atop her cousin's grave and lit it. This was her final service to the princess. Mara had started to show signs of sickness when they began their journey, but soon enough they couldn't progress any further. They had been camped here by the river for 10 days now, as her condition only worsened. Still at least a month away from the kingdom of Amica. When the sun set, Mara was finally gone, only 14 years old. Annette went to her knees and prayed over the candle. A dark bird watched her from above. When she was done, she returned to the camp. Bella was in her own tent, having cried herself to sleep. Sir Damien had wandered off when the princess passed. Annette didn't know where to, likely nowhere. Sir Pierre and Edmund had busied themselves, not wanting to help bury her, not wanting to acknowledge what has happened. They sat with bowls. Neither ate. "We'll pack up in the morning and make our way," Annette said, as she took her own bowl. She didn't think she'd have an appetite, but the work had emptied her stomach. "Our way?" Edmund asked, shaking. "Our way where?" "Home," Sir Pierre answered. "My father served her. My father served King Kenneth. He was promised his lands and titles back. That should extend to me. I'll be welcomed back. I'm the rightful lord of Castle Ayr, My granduncle was a high lord. I'm fifth cousins to the king. Not on the royal side, thought Annette. That doesn't matter, Edmund said, his leg bouncing as it often did when he grew anxious. The princess died in our care. Even if we brought her body back, we'd still be executed for failing her. You've heard the stories. Kenneth killed his first wife, killed his royal aunt, and now they're saying he killed his brother to take his crown. This is not the man you knew as a child. Then we don't go to Amica. We carry on as a sellsword company. We've just lost a squire, that's all. The words came out of Annette's mouth, but as she said them even, she knew it wouldn't work. That merchant sent a letter to Amica, Edmund explained. He knew we were coming. He knew our names, our company, our route. No doubt he has sent riders to meet us on the way. If we don't show up, he will hunt us to the ends of the world to find out what happened. She wondered if Edmund's hair had turned white when he's so young because of his worries. She was cautious. He was something else. Annette took a bite of her loaf. She looked at the men before her. The knight was thinking of how to survive. The albino accountant was thinking of how to die. So, Pierre groaned, we carry on and we die, or we run and we die. Any other ideas, Edmund? Edmund thought for a moment, his red eyes staring deep into the flames. We unbury her. Annette sighed and slid off her log, crawling into a ball next to the warm fire. Look, you've made Annette die too. Hear me out, Edmund said, putting his bowl to the side. We're dead either way, but if we do the right thing, he might let us choose how we die. We tell the truth. She got sick and died on the way. I'll choose the headsman, a clean slice, no pain. Annette sat up. And how do we explain all the dirt over her corpse? You could have had this idea before I buried her. Now they'll just think we buried her alive. We tell the truth, Edmund said again, his voice quaking. Annette lay back down on her dirt bed. We were blind with grief and just did what you do when someone dies. We weren't thinking. We love her. We loved her. We can't just run away, and we can't go to Amica without her. You seem to think my uncle is violent and unforgiving. What makes you think this cruel King Kenneth would be kind enough to let us choose how we die? Once we're there, it's out of our hands. He could tie us to a pyre and let us cook for all we know. He didn't reply. A moment later, Annette heard another slump as Edmund copied her, curling up into a ball next to the fire. Perhaps, Edmund posited, almost out of breath from worrying. We're done here. Annette, dig 5 more graves for us. Pierre, you can be our headsman. I'll write our final wills. Let us hope one of Kenneth's riders finds it. There was no reply. Annette turned her head and looked through the fire at the dark night. He was looking at her, his eyes feasting upon her. His eyes and his hands were often on her when Mara wasn't looking. She never complained or spoke up about it. Don't say no to a knight, and don't refuse a man who always carries a dagger. Sir Pierre always favoured Mara more, though no doubt because she was actual royalty and Annette was just a commoner. But she didn't expect him to move on so quickly. He loved that girl. They were friends long before they were lovers. Perhaps he's not looking to move on, Annette wondered. Maybe he agrees with Edmund, and he's just thinking about his final meal. Annette sighed and rolled over, letting the fire warm her back. She wondered if she could make it on her own. Annette had skills. She knew business and diplomacy. She knew how to cook and clean and sew and charm. She could speak all the common tongues. She could work somewhere as a servant, a cook, a squire, an apprentice, even a courtesan. She could do anything, really, so long as she escaped Kenneth's lackeys. She'd have to change her name, maybe even change her looks. She's become a woman since any of Kenneth's men knew her, though she looks just like her mother, who looked just like her sister, Kenneth's late wife. If I looked more like Mara, Annette thought, I'd have a better chance at going undetected. As she looks now, she's more likely to be mistaken for Mara than for Annette. Annette sat up. She turned to Pierre, who was holding Mara's hollowed tiara. His eyes flashed up at her. They both had the same idea. You were always better at the curtsies than her, Pierre said. Annette felt her stomach turn. Thinking it was one thing, but verbalizing it was another. She held her waist and took a deep breath. Food was scarce. Now was no time to waste it on vomiting. Who, me? Edmund asked, his face still buried in the ground. They ignored him as Pierre handed Annette the tiara. She started to sort out her hair as Pierre turned and moved to the other side of the camp to rummage through a sack. It's a pity we buried her in her finest clothes, he noted. But then again, Annette pointed out, even she was growing out of those. I'm half a head taller and, well, a woman. Pierre chuckled at that. His eyes glanced back at her to drink her in for a second, and then he went back to the sack. Edmund slowly started to pull himself up from beside the fire. Pierre took out a dress and skipped through the camp back to her, holding it tightly against her chest as she placed the tiara upon her head. How much of the royal manners do you know? Sir Pierre asked her. More than she did, less than her father does. What about private memories? I was never not by her side, unless when she was alone, or needed to be alone, he smirked at her as he squeezed at the chest of the dress. She took the top of the dress and pushed him back. Kenneth never had any moments alone with her, she said, ignoring his indiscretion. He didn't really know how to have a daughter. It was a decent dress for a noblewoman, less so for royalty, but it fit her well. She couldn't see it from Pierre's perspective, but his eyes were as wide as his smile. It could work. What the hell are you two doing? Edmund asked when he noticed them. Surviving, Annette told him. You said it yourself. We can't run away, and we can't go there without her. So you'll dress her body up in another outfit? No, Edmund. We go there with the Princess Mara, alive. For a scholar, it took him a few seconds too many to understand. He shook his head and held his hands out. No, that's ridiculous. You've gone mad, the both of you. Mad with grief. This would never work. You don't look like her at all. But I did when Kenneth last saw us, Annette told him. In that time, we grew up differently, but she could have grown up like me, or I like her. Pierre was rummaging through the sack again. Annette looks more like a princess than Mara did, anyway. No, the skittish accountant squawked. Annette is a year older than Mara. She looks more like a woman than a child. Good, Pierre said. That could make it harder to prove she isn't Mara. She's grown up in the past 4 years. She also looks quite like Mara's Ma, if you remember her. For a grieving father and husband, she's perfect. That's sick. If he finds out, when he finds out, he won't send for the headsman. He won't even light the pyre. It'll be the dungeons for the both of you. You'd be lucky if he kills you. Annette laid the dress down and took Edmund's hands. Ed, she said to him in a soft voice, we've survived through so much. We can survive through so much more. We just have to stick together. It's too big a secret. Too many conspirators. Bella wouldn't handle it. She's too nervous. Pierre chuckled at that. Of course, she's the nervous one here. You'll be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. All it takes is one slip-up, and you're dead. So, Annette sighed, not much different than being a servant, then. Edmund, I have been acting all my life. I have been shadowing my cousin all my life. I have been going above and beyond to survive all my life. I was made for this. Do you want to be on the run for the rest of our lives? Do you want to be sleeping on the ground and eating hard bread forever? Or do you want to be a member of a royal court, well cared for, well respected, and free to do whatever you want, as long as you keep one little secret? Edmund stared into her eyes, then looked up at the tiara on her head. She could feel him shaking. A sword stabbed into the ground. They turned to see Sir Damien of the Dam at the edge of the camp. Annette didn't hear him approach. None of them did. Pierre dropped the sack and held his hands out. Damien! Hey there, big guy! Damien's eyes were on Annette. No, on her tiara. Annette stood up straight, lifted her head, not just to face him, but to almost look down at him. Her face dropped to remove all emotion. She was a princess. She must look the part. Sir Damien, she began, we intend to survive. King Kenneth will have our heads if he discovers that we let Mara die under our protection. So he will never discover it. I will play the part of the royal princess Mara Moran. We must uphold this one lie, and in doing so we will be home, and we will be well cared for. Are you willing to cooperate?" Damien stared at her with his one good eye. After a long moment he said, "Yes, princess." Edmund gasped. "No, I won't let this happen. What you are proposing is high treason. I want a clean death, not whatever torture you will incur with this folly. I won't be a part of this. I won't lie for you." Annette and Damien stared at him without saying anything. The time for convincing was over. Edmund Anders had made his position very clear. He was not willing to cooperate. Pierre silently made his way behind the man and unsheathed his dagger. The princess was as ready as she'd ever be when the carriage finally arrived. They met the king's riders on the road just outside of Amica, and they brought them to the nearest lord's estate. They had a day to prepare before King Kenneth was to arrive, and Mara spent it wisely. Mara caught up on the affairs of the state, practiced her curtsies, and chose the finest dress the lord's eldest daughter had to offer. The dress she arrived in had served its purpose to convince a lord, but they needed a finer outfit to convince a king. The lord had red rubies and white opals to put into her tiara, to return it to its original state. Sir Damien and Sir Pierre, her sworn swords, were fitted with better armour to look more presentable for her father. The lord's daughters served as her ladies-in-waiting for the time being, helping her to get bathed and groomed and dressed. Mara's own lady-in-waiting, Bella of Brighthill, had passed away on the journey, much like her accountant and her cousin, after suffering an attack of the nerves. 6 had departed the merchant's manor months ago. 3 arrived. Mara saw the royal carriage pass through the gate, pulled by fine silver stallions. The entire household stood outside the lord's castle. The servants lined the walls behind them. The lord stood at the bottom of the steps, the princess at the top, with her 2 sworn swords by her side, and the lord's daughters behind them. The courtyard was huge. Mara hadn't seen anything like it before. If this was what a noble estate looked like, she couldn't wait to see a royal estate. The carriage came to a stop and a large man stepped out. Her father was just as tall as when she last saw him, but he had grown a little heftier since becoming king. He had thick dark hair and a sharp beard, and his swarthy skin had grown lighter in the last 4 years. Behind him emerged his latest wife, a dark and slender woman who carried a babe in her arms, and after her came Mara's brother, a lanky and timid man, nothing like their father. The king sauntered down the path. When the lord bowed, the king grabbed him, lifted him back to his feet, and embraced him, almost crushing the poor man. Mara saw him whispering something into the noble's ear, but she heard nothing. Kenneth then moved the noble aside and stared right at her. That was the sign. The Princess Mara Moran descended the steps towards her father. Even in her thoughts she was the princess. Mara kept her back straight, her head held high, and her face devoid of emotion, the regal way, just as her mother taught her. Her father eyed her as she stood before him. His hand touched her tiara, then came down her long silver hair. He then brushed her unblemished cheek, and then he took a step back to look at her body. She saw his eyes squint at her, but a smile was slowly forming on his face. He put his hands on Mara's cheek again and brought his face towards her. "You look just like your mother," he told her. She felt her heart skip a beat, but she did not let her cheeks be coloured by her thoughts. "Dad," she said, as Mara used to call him. He smiled and slid his arm around her back as he turned around. A crowd had formed round the carriage, some from his company, others from those who gathered outside the gates and swarmed in after it opened. There were hundreds of people, and they were all watching her. "My daughter," King Kenneth Moran proclaimed to them all. "Princess Mara Moran, the white flame of Amica, has returned to me." With that, the crowd erupted into cheers. A smile broke out over Mara's face. She was the Princess Mara Moran, and she was home. She looked out over her people with her bright green eyes.